I'm Mindy from the beautiful Mile High city of Denver, Colorado, and you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm here with my co-host Sophie. Hey Sophie.
Hey Kelly.
And we're here to do a recap episode of the election from last week. So I'm going to note at the outset that we are recording on Tuesday, November 13th at 7:30 p.m. It is possible that by the time you listen to this, by the time we release this, that things may have changed slightly, but probably not too much if you're listening to this on Wednesday. So we've got some thoughts on how the election went, and then we're going to also, at the end, talk some about where our podcast is going. I think this is a nice bookend episode because the only other episode that's been just the two of us was the very first episode we ever did in September of 2017. Since then, every single episode has had one or more guests. So that's pretty exciting, Sophie.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think that we've done so many episodes. I mean, I feel like that when we started this, I couldn't have imagined how many episodes we would have, how many listeners we would have, and how many great guests we would have. I think we sort of had originally thought, oh, we'll just get together and talk about politics, and every once in a while maybe we'll have a guest. And then we had so many great guests who were so kind and so gracious to come on that it sort of turned into the guests because they were much more interesting than we were.
And it's a lot easier to just ask them to talk.
That is true. Well, and I feel like with candidates, that's one of the things that people have really enjoyed about the podcast is that it's not always the case that you get to hear from people running for office in anything other than sound bites. And we sit down and we talk for 10, 20, 30 minutes with the candidate about not just, what are their talking points, what is their platform, but who are they and why do they want to run for office and what is the experience of running for office like? Those are things I think they don't get asked all the time. And so I think people really like getting that window into candidates' lives.
And so, speaking of episodes and candidates, this is episode number 156.
Woo!
That's actually an undercount by a little bit because I did some video episodes there at the end. And I'm not actually counting our election night episode because we didn't put it out in audio form. So we've done slightly more than that. And I don't actually have a total count of guests because we talked to so very many guests that I actually lost count. But we had 156 candidates who were on the ballot last week. We've actually talked to more candidates than that. We talked to some people who had elections that were earlier, and we talked to some people who lost in primaries. So we've probably talked to about 20 more candidates than that total, but that's a lot of candidates. Mm-hmm. The most were in Ohio. We'll come back to Ohio in a little bit. And the most were at U.S. House. But we talked to people sort of all over literally all over the map in all 50 states. Talked to people running for everything from U.S. Senate and governor all the way down to town council. And I think we got a really good sense of sort of who candidates were this year, at least on the Democratic side. Of course, we did not talk to any Republicans running for office. And
Nope.
We talked to one sole independent and a few people who are running in technically nonpartisan races. But I think we got a pretty good sense of sort of what was going on election night. And it made it way more interesting to watch the results come in.
It did. And we had 33 guests who won their elections on Tuesday. And those guests really were from anywhere from a city or a county council or a city level race all the way up to, we had people who won in the House. We had Laura Kelly, who is now the governor of Kansas. Yay! Which was very exciting. 2 attorney general candidates won, Josh Kaul in Wisconsin and Kwame Raoul in Illinois. And those those are not like small states. Those are kind of big deal states. We talked to somebody who won Secretary of State in Colorado. That's really exciting too. So we had like a lot of, candidates win from across the spectrum, from small local races that make a difference on a local level to flashy CNN headline races. And I think that was really exciting.
Yeah, and we had 11 candidates who are now going into the U.S. House, including one who was sworn in today being Tuesday. So Mary Gay Scanlon was actually in both a special election for the Pennsylvania 7th District, I think I might be getting these numbers wrong, and the regular election, so that was the old Pennsylvania District, and then the regular election for the new Pennsylvania District, and she won both of those, so she was sworn in this morning for the old district,
awesome.
Which makes her currently the only woman representing Pennsylvania in the federal delegation, because up until now they had no women, which is shocking.
My gosh.
She'll be joined by a couple of other women in January, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And two of the big upsets were candidates that we interviewed. Kendra Horn in Oklahoma. I think she was the candidate who most overperformed her polls in the whole U.S. House this year.
Although, to be fair, there were not many polls.
That is true. That is true. But also very far overperformed what you'd expect from the partisan lean based on the 2016 election. And then Sharice Davids, who we always knew could win, but who surprised some people by winning her House race in Kansas. So it was really exciting to sort of have the inner scoop. And, of course, Laura Kelly, who I knew she was going to win because Chris Kovac was terrible. But I think some people were surprised to see that Kansas elected a Democratic governor. And so we had her on the podcast, too. So it was fun to have that inside scoop.
Yeah, and I very much thought Laura Kelly was going to win. I did not think she would win by as much as she won by.
Yeah, me too.
The stories coming out afterwards about how Chris Kobach didn't even campaign, and then 2 days before the election, he was in the governor's mansion taking a tour and, measuring the windows for drapes.
Oh, my gosh. That just makes it even better. Yes.
So, yeah, there were some really great things, and it's been super exciting to see some of our candidates now be on MSNBC. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody in my family texted me to tell me that Lauren Underwood was on Rachel Maddow the other night, and Sharice was on, and then Alyssa Slotkin was on the MSNBC morning shows, and, it's super exciting to see these candidates that we always knew were superstars, and now everyone's sort of waking up to it. So I think that's great. And, I think we may have been the only media outlet in America, and, media outlet in scare quotes, who paid any attention to Kendra Horn in the Oklahoma 5th. Mm-hmm. Although I've been telling people on Twitter, if anyone had been paying any attention to that race, they would have known it was possible. But clearly no one was paying attention to that race.
Yep.
What were your biggest surprises of the night, good or bad?
I think I was surprised, actually, that Joe Donnelly didn't hold on in Indiana. It makes sense. Academically, I totally understand why he lost. And if you would have asked me in any other race, will a candidate who is a Democrat win in Indiana, I would laugh at you. Mm-hmm. But I had seen his polling. It looked pretty good. He seemed like he walked a pretty fine line in Indiana. And I think the timing of the results made it more surprising than it actually was, just because I had been poised to get excited about things. And then the first races that came in were Indiana and Kentucky, and they were not good for us. Mm-hmm. And Kelly knows this because I was there, but I basically had a panic attack and couldn't eat and kind of couldn't breathe and was very pale.
It's true.
It was very scary. It was a scary moment. I kind of was afraid of what was going to happen, but that was a big surprise to me, but it really shouldn't have been a big surprise to me. I would say a more pleasant surprise for me was New Mexico. Mm-hmm. New Mexico went completely blue. I lived in New Mexico for 2 years. I know that it is a state with a blue soul, but I also know that there are an awful lot of wealthy old people in Santa Fe And so I was a little concerned about New Mexico being too Arizona-ish. And I was pleasantly surprised to see even the 2nd district, which is fairly conservative, went Democratic. So I was really excited to see New Mexico. That was a very pleasant surprise for me. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was a little bit less surprised by New Mexico, probably because I didn't have the inside knowledge and all the numbers sort of looked like they were trending well in New Mexico. I think the surprise, the biggest disappointment of the night for me was Ohio.
Yeah.
We talked to 22 candidates in Ohio, and not a single one of them won. One of them is still pending, has not technically been called, but she is currently trailing by about 300 votes. So, I didn't expect huge successes in Ohio. I didn't expect them to, flip all the House seats or anything, but I thought at least one or two would pick them up. I mean, I guess I had just fallen in love with so many of the candidates there that I was just trying to will myself to ignore the polls. So I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. And, it just really points to how gerrymandered the U.S. House map still is in Ohio.
I think that's true. I also think, though, the demographics are not on our side in Ohio. I think if you look at the demographic shifts over the past 10, 20, even 30 years, Ohio's getting older and whiter, and that's just been accelerating, really. There's a lot of brain drain going on in Ohio. A lot of young people, to be honest, like you and I, don't live there. We go and we get our degrees and we go move somewhere else, like, for example, Chicago or Madison. And so a lot of the people who would be sort of your natural Democratic voters aren't there. And it's got kind of an Appalachian vibe going on lately. So I think part of Ohio's problem is that its economy isn't so fantastic. I think that's part of what's holding it back too, and keeping it fairly on the older spectrum. But yeah, I think demographically it's been trending a little bit more Appalachian lately.
Yeah, although it's really interesting to see nothing flipped in Ohio. So all of the incumbents, there was only one open House seat, and that went still to a Republican. But you look at Iowa, and Abby Finkenauer was predicted to win, so that wasn't a huge surprise. But Cindy Axne won, and that was a little bit of a surprise. And so, but Iowa still elected Steve King, and they put a governor at the top of the ticket. I think maybe that's the thing that is sort of my overall surprise, was how many states kind of split tickets. It's like they wanted to put a check on Trump, but they're not really turning Democratic. And so, I sort of wonder where all of that's going to go 2 years from now.
I think that's a really interesting point. Looking at my state, I was shocked to find that Tony Evers, who is, a reasonably progressive guy, but who was kind of as I said in the live show, not a particularly exciting candidate. He's sort of like a very friendly, nice, boring white guy. And he won by a lot less than Tammy Baldwin, our senator, won. She is a vocally progressive populist, but also in like a social way. She's a progressive, and she won by a mile. And so I think that's really interesting that there was, if you look at the maps and you look at where the votes are concentrated, there were quite a few people who walked into the voting booth on Tuesday and said, I'm going to vote for Scott Walker, and I'm also going to vote for Tammy Baldwin. And, that's fascinating to me, because those are two completely, directly, diametrically opposed ideologies. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, as a person who votes on issues, I'm wondering how people make that decision.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to vote for Sherrod Brown, but also Mike DeWine. A lot of people made that decision. It just doesn't make sense to people like us. So I think that's something to watch out for. That's the big concern, right? Was this a wave that keeps going in 2020, or is this a knee-jerk reaction against Trump, but, not really people changing? That's going to be the big test in Kansas, right? Did Laura Kelly just get elected because people didn't like Kobach and they wanted to put a stop to Brownbackian kind of policies, or were they really willing to vote for a Democrat? And I think the jury is going to be really still out on that one.
Yeah.
So there are a bunch of races still out. There's 10 that are not yet called. Looking at those 10, so right now the Democrats have gained 32 seats. And I think it's looking like the 3 California seats that are still out are pretty safe for Democrats, even though one technically, the Republican's still in the lead. But it looks like the Democrats are going to take all 3 of those. And then there's a lot of question marks. The Utah 4th District, up until today, Ben McAdams was pretty far in the lead. It was about 2.5 percentage points. Now he's only about 0.5% up. And if you like really nerdy discussions, you should go on Twitter and watch Dave Wasserman and Nate Rackich and Nate Silver talk about Utah 4th. Holy moly, they are like breaking down where they think the ballots might be. Nobody knows where the ballots are right now. But they're breaking down how many they think might be in Utah County, which is pretty red, versus Salt Lake County, which is pretty blue. They're really breaking it down, and nobody knows enough to make any really good predictions. So I think most people think it's going to be a nail biter. So we'll see what happens in Utah 4th. The Maine 2nd District is super fascinating because Maine is using ranked choice voting this year.
Yeah.
So right now the Republican...
And there's apparently a lawsuit. The person losing filed a lawsuit.
Right. So Bruce
because he's losing.
Polkwin, I'm not sure how you say his name, but Bruce Polkwin, who's the Republican incumbent, actually he's winning right now. But he is pretty sure that after the first round, when they go to the second round and use the ranked choice, that he'll be losing. And so he's preemptively filing a lawsuit saying that it's a pretty weak lawsuit, as far as I can tell. I'm no lawyer, but it looks pretty weak to me. But saying that it's like unconstitutional to use ranked choice voting in a federal election. Now there's going to be some counter lawsuits where voters who voted for one of the independents but voted for the Democrat second are going to sue and say, no, I only voted this way because I knew that there'd be a ranked choice. We shall see, but that's super fascinating. I don't think that Polkwin's lawsuit has any ground because there are lots of places that have runoffs.
Yeah.
So it's not really, saying that you should take whoever is in the lead after election night doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Definitely.
So there's those districts. There's New Jersey 3rd. I'm not sure what they're waiting for there. Right now the Democrat, Andy Kim, is up by about a percentage point. I think there's maybe some overseas ballots or something that aren't counted there yet. New York 22nd, I have no idea what they're waiting for on that one. But that's really, really close. I suspect it's going to go to a recount. Georgia 7th is part of all these outstanding ballots in Georgia. There's lawsuits going on. There's possible runoffs and recounts, and Georgia's a mess.
Yes, Georgia is a mess.
And then New York 27th and Texas 23rd are probably just going to stay Republican like they are now. So... it looks to me like we'll probably pick up another 5 or 6 seats. I was thinking maybe we'd get all the way to 40, and that's not looking very likely at this point.
538 estimates a 38 total right now. So
yeah, so that'd be
and since
more.
they had us right on in how many their predictions were pretty solid. So right now I'm choosing to trust them.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. And Senate is technically, there's still 2 out. I don't see Nelson taking it. I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem likely to me. And as much as I would dearly love to win that Mississippi runoff, I don't see us picking up a Senate seat in Mississippi.
I think Nelson is an interesting case. I think looking at the data from 538 and from other people, entirely possible, it's not likely, but it's possible that if the machine recount goes through and it's still this close, and then the hand recount goes through, it's been a machine error in Broward County. It looks like there's a lot of people who voted for Gillum and then didn't vote for Nelson. That seems unlikely in Broward County. It's entirely, apparently, and I've read a lot of stuff on it, it looks like it is a very remarkable undervote. So it's possible it's a machine error. If it's not a machine error, there's no chance. And it's I would probably say like it's a 2% chance that it's a machine error.
Yeah,
but it's still possible.
It's probably more likely it's just really poor design because, it's Florida.
That's true. But I feel like in a year like this where people are so invested, I don't know. I mean, turnout has been really up. The average midterm turnout is 40%, and we hit about 50% this year. 100 million people voted. I just feel like since there was so much excitement, to me, it's hard to imagine a person skipping that section on the ballot. But then I always check my ballot before I send it, or I put it in the machine.
Yeah. So, well, we'll all find out.
Yeah, you will.
Don't hold your breath on it. It's going to be a while. But we'll find out because I think it will go to a hand recount. And so someone's going to look at these and is going to see what's going on. Is there anything else we need to say about 2018 before we move on to 2020? I mean, I'd say it's a blue wave. Like, there's all these, well, was it a wave? Wasn't it a wave? I think a lot of that just came down to sort of the timing of what came in. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, we saw Indiana and Kentucky and beginnings of Florida first, and those didn't look very promising. But then things kept looking up from there. And certainly the late votes, all the stuff that's being, especially California, we're picking up so many seats there.
I mean, it's the biggest Democratic gain in the House since Watergate, so I feel like that is a pretty good indication that it's a wave. We picked up, like I said, 538 estimates us at 38 plus House seats. We picked up 7 governorships. We lost 2 Senate seats probably, but given the map and the number that we were defending versus the number that Republicans were defending and the way that partisan polarization has been shaking out, it's actually pretty impressive that we only lost 2. So, go us. Also, I just want to talk a little bit about money, too, because this was a record-breaking year. $5.2 billion was spent on this midterm, which is 35% more than was spent on 2014. And for the first time in forever, Democrats spent more than Republicans. We spent $2.5 billion, and Republicans only spent $2.2. Booyah. But I think it's really interesting that Republicans have been freaking out about Democratic fundraising advantages. There's been a lot of talk, apparently, in the higher echelons of the Republican Party about Act Blue and how they're, in awe of our fundraising potential Act Blue. And I don't think that that's really focusing on the right things. I don't think that the fact that we set up this website where you can donate to Democratic candidates is really that, breaking. They could probably do the same thing. I think it was just a lot of people who had never donated before or who had only maybe donated to a presidential campaign every once in a while got serious about it and realized that every donation matters and started donating to smaller races. And I think that's why we had such a fantastic, amazing, actually history-making fundraising advantage in the last quarter before the election. So keep it up, guys, because that was awesome, and I think that went a really long way towards making the blue wave materialize.
And if you're feeling bereft that you have nowhere to donate now, a couple of calls to action for you right now. No, I'm not about to say go donate money to Two Broads Talking Politics, although if you'd like to, we have a Patreon page. What I am about to say is that, in fact, there are a few candidates who are still running, and so you should pay a lot of attention to those. So there are, so far, could be more, but so far 2 big runoffs. There is in, of course, Mississippi. This is the one people have been hearing more about. There's a Senate runoff. This is for the special election. They purposely did not have, I don't really understand why, but they didn't have party on the ballot. And so there were 2 Republicans running, 1 Democrat, and one, the current senator, Cindy Hyde-Smith and the Democrat Mike Espy both make it to the runoff, which is on November 27th, which is kind of terrible timing. It's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So there are currently postcards to voters for Mike Espy, and you could certainly donate money to his campaign. That would be a super enormous pickup in the Senate, and Cindy Hyde-Smith is a verified, total racist, terrible person. So
yes.
If you would like proof of that, you can go listen to a comment where she says she would go to a public hanging and be in the front row. And Mike Espy's a great guy and a good candidate, so go help out his campaign. And then the other campaign that is super important is John Barrow, who is in Georgia, is running for Secretary of State. That is in a runoff on December 4th. And if Stacey Abrams does not get into a runoff, there probably won't be as many people paying attention to it. But Secretary of State in Georgia could be an enormous pickup for us.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely go support John Barrow's campaign as well. So Sophie had some kid issues and had to go, but I wanted to wrap up by talking a little bit about where we're going to go with the podcast from here. So we're planning on doing probably one episode a week on Wednesdays, which is the way we started out. It's possible we'll creep up to 2 again at some point. And I think I'm going to keep playing around with some short video podcasts. We had a lot of fun with that right before the election. So if we do those, we'll post those both on our YouTube channel, and we'll also post those from our website, so you can check those out. I have one with Brian Harnsberger, who was on an episode right before the election about self-care. He and I are going to talk before Thanksgiving about how to talk to your relatives who don't vote the same way you do. So I think that'll be really good, and you should check that out, and we'll promote that on our social media when it goes out as well. So a few of the things we have planned going forward on the podcast. One is that we're going to take at least a little bit of a look at Chicago, the Chicago mayoral and aldermanic elections that are coming up. We've got a couple of aldermanic candidates who will be on, and I think we'll do an overview as well about sort of what Chicago politics looks like. It's really fascinating. It's, I think, one of the most interesting places politically in the country on a local level. So we will be sure to talk about that, but I promise I won't take over the podcast with Chicago politics. It would be easy to do. We're also going to be talking to some of our previous guests, some of our previous candidate guests, some of them who won their elections, about what they're looking forward to, what their legislative priorities are, and then also some of them who did not win their elections, about what's next, where they go from here, what they learned. So I think those will be some really interesting conversations. We'll keep you posted on those. And then we also want to get back to doing some of what we started with, which is to talk to activists and authors, directors of nonprofits. We were doing a lot more of that if you look back in our archives before we got so close to the election and we're talking to so many candidates, and it was really fun. So I think we'd like to get back to doing more of that. If you have people you would like to recommend to us, we would love to hear about it. You can reach us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook in our DMs. And then I also wanted to mention that I spent 2 hours standing in line today, including one of which was outside in 21-degree weather, waiting to meet Michelle Obama and get a copy of her book, which I now have in hand. And Michelle Obama is just the most radiant, amazing person in real life. Some of that may have been the hype and the cold, but I got to shake hands with her. I got to meet her briefly, and she was just practically glowing. And the way she looked at you and shook hands, it really made me feel like she knew me, like I was a person that she knew and she cared about. So it was really interesting. And it was especially interesting for me to have to spend 2 hours in line without my phone. There were no phones or recording devices allowed. And so I actually had to talk to the people around me in line, which, if anyone knows me, is a little bit strange for me. But it was really great. It was super cool to meet her and just to see how much excitement there was in the neighborhood for her and her book. And so I'm looking forward to reading the book now. And if there are juicy tidbits, I'm sure I'll be sharing them on Twitter. So be sure to check us out on Twitter at twobroadstalk. So that's all for us this week. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll have lots of exciting content coming your way every Wednesday.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.